The massive space station trembled as another wave of strange energy hit its shields. Admiral Vexteri pressed her face against the reinforced viewing window, staring at the thing that had appeared 6 months ago and changed everything. The dimensional rift hung in space like a wound in reality itself, pulsing with colors that hurt to look at directly. "Ma'am, the readings are getting worse," called out Science Director Mo 10 from the station. His usually calm voice cracked with fear. "Whatever's on the other side is pushing harder. The barrier between dimensions is getting thinner every hour." Vexteri turned to face the bridge crew. 12 different alien species worked together here, representing the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. They had technology that could move planets, weapons that could crack moons in half, and shields that had never failed in 3,000 years of warfare. None of it mattered now. "How long do we have?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. Mole 10's fingers danced across a control panel, bringing up holographic displays filled with numbers that made no sense. At the current rate of expansion, 3 days, maybe 4 if we're lucky. After that, the rift will be wide enough for whatever's waiting on the other side to break through completely. The bridge fell silent, except for the steady hum of machinery. Everyone knew what that meant. They'd sent dozens of unmanned probes through the rift over the past months. Not a single one had returned. The few that managed to transmit data before going silent showed glimpses of a nightmare dimension filled with creatures that defied every law of physics they knew. "What about the evacuation?" Vexteri asked. Commander Zixtal looked up from his communication station, his blue skin pale with worry. "It's not working, Admiral. The rift's influence is spreading faster than our transport ships can move people. We've managed to evacuate maybe 10% of the populations in nearby systems. The rest..." He didn't need to finish. Everyone understood. Billions of innocent beings were trapped, waiting for whatever horror was about to emerge in the tear in space-time. "Our weapons still have no effect?" Vexteri asked, even though she already knew the answer. "None whatsoever," Mole 10 replied. "Energy beams pass right through the rift like it isn't there. Physical projectiles disappear completely. It's as if the rules of our universe simply don't apply to whatever's on the other side." Vexteri walked to the tactical display, where a three-dimensional map showed their fleet positions. 2,000 ships from across the galaxy, armed with the most powerful weapons ever created, all hanging uselessly in space around the rift. They looked impressive, but she knew they were about as useful as throwing rocks at a hurricane. "There has to be something we haven't tried," she said, more to herself than to her crew. "Ma'am," called out Lieutenant Colven from the sensor station. "I'm picking up more activity from the rift. Something's moving around in there. Something big." The main screen flickered to life, showing a close-up view of the dimensional tear. Through the swirling energy, shapes moved in the darkness beyond. They were massive, easily the size of battleships, and they seemed to be gathering near the barrier. "They're organizing," whispered Mole 10. "Whatever they are, they're not just random monsters. They're intelligent, and they're planning something." The temperature on the bridge seemed to drop several degrees. Every species represented here had faced wars, natural disasters, and cosmic threats before. But this was different. This was facing the completely unknown, armed with weapons that might as well be toys. "Admiral," Commander Zixtal said quietly, "perhaps it's time to consider the unthinkable." Everyone knew what he meant. Total evacuation of this entire sector of the galaxy, abandoning billions of worlds, trillions of lives, and retreating to the far edges of known space. It would mean giving up everything their civilizations had built over thousands of years. "No," Vexteri said firmly. "We don't abandon our people. There has to be another way." But even as she said the words, she felt doubt creeping into her heart. Her species had ruled the stars for centuries. They had never encountered a problem they couldn't solve with superior technology and careful planning. The idea that they might be truly helpless was almost impossible to accept. The rift pulsed again, brighter this time. The station's lights flickered as the energy wave passed through their shields like they weren't even there. In the distance, she could see other ships and their fleet struggling with the same power fluctuations. "Ma'am," Mole 10 said quietly, "I don't think we have 3 days anymore. The expansion is accelerating." Vexthery closed her eyes and tried to think. Somewhere in the vast database of galactic knowledge, there had to be an answer. Some weapon they'd forgotten about, some technology they'd overlooked, some ally they hadn't considered. Anything but watching helplessly as their universe came to an end. Ambassador Kethvar walked through the empty corridors of the Council archives, his footsteps echoing in the vast underground chambers. Most people avoided this place. The archives contained millions of old files, reports, and records that nobody had looked at in decades. But with their entire civilization facing destruction, even the most forgotten information might hold the key to survival. "Computer, activate search protocols," he said to the air. The ancient AI system hummed to life, holographic displays flickering around him like ghostly windows. "What are your search parameters?" The computer asked in its flat, emotionless voice. Kethvar took a deep breath. This felt like madness, but they were out of conventional options. Search for any species classified as Deathworld origin. Focus on unusual stress responses or combat capabilities. The computer processed his request for several minutes. Finally, dozens of files appeared in the air around him, most of them marked with warning symbols or classified stamps. Kethvar had never seen so many red alerts in one search. He started reading through the reports and immediately understood why most civilized species avoided contact with Deathworld inhabitants. The files described creatures that lived in conditions that would kill normal beings within hours. Worlds with crushing gravity, toxic atmospheres, radiation levels that could melt starship hulls, and weather patterns that changed from freezing to boiling in minutes. One report caught his attention. It was filed by the exploration vessel Wanderer nearly 200 years ago from a mission to the outer spiral arms of the galaxy. The crew had discovered a small blue world orbiting a yellow star, so far from civilized space that it might as well have been in another universe. Species designation, human, Kethvar read aloud. Planet classification, Class 12 Deathworld. He had to read that twice. Class 12 was the highest danger rating in their system. Most Class 5 worlds were considered uninhabitable. Class 12 meant a planet so hostile that even their most advanced environmental suits would fail within days. The report continued with details that made his blood run cold. The planet's gravity was 20% higher than galactic standard, enough to crush the bones of most species over time. The atmosphere contained oxygen at levels that were actually toxic to most life forms. Radiation from the star bombarded the surface constantly. The weather included storms that could level cities, and the ground itself moved and shook without warning. "How does anything survive on such a world?" he muttered. But the answer was in the next section of the report. The humans had not just survived on this nightmare planet. They had thrived. They had built cities, developed technology, and created art and music. They had domesticated some of the planet's predators and learned to predict its violent weather patterns. Most incredibly, they seemed to enjoy the challenges their world threw at them. But it was a psychological profile that made Kethvar stop reading and stare at the screen. The Wanderer science team had run standard stress response tests on the humans they encountered. Every civilized species in the galaxy showed the same pattern when faced with mortal danger: increased heart rate, tunnel vision, reduced cognitive function, and eventually paralysis or panic. The humans were different. When the researchers put them in life-threatening situations, their heart rates actually stabilized. Their thinking became clearer and more focused. Instead of freezing with fear, they became more creative, finding solutions to problems that seemed impossible. The more dangerous the situation became, the calmer and more determined they got. Subjects display what can only be described as an inverted stress response, the report noted. Where normal beings become less capable under pressure, these creatures become more capable. They appear to function best when facing immediate mortal threat. Kethvar felt a chill run down his spine. The report described humans fighting massive predators with primitive weapons, diving into raging storms to rescue their companions, and working together to survive disasters that would wipe out entire cities of any other species. They didn't just endure their hostile world. They seemed to find meaning in the struggle against it. The Wanderer's captain had recommended further contact and study, but the files showed no follow-up missions. The coordinates led to such a remote part of the galaxy that it would take months to reach, even with their fastest ships. The council had apparently decided that studying Deathworld savages wasn't worth the time or expense. But there was one more detail that caught Kethvar's attention. The humans had asked the Wanderer's crew about other intelligent life in the galaxy. When told about the great civilizations among the stars, they hadn't asked for technology or trade agreements. They had asked if anyone needed help. "Computer, prepare navigation data for these coordinates," Kethvar ordered, "and send a message to the shipyards. I need the fastest long-range vessel they have, fueled and ready for immediate departure." "Ambassador," the computer said, "that destination is in an unexplored region. The journey will take considerable time, and there is no guarantee the species still exists." Kethvar looked one more time at the report's final note. "Humans show strong protective instincts toward other intelligent beings, even strangers. Recommend peaceful contact if conditions permit." "Maybe that's exactly what we need," he said softly. "Beings who run toward danger instead of away from it." General Tom Bradley stood in the underground command center of NORAD, watching the most incredible thing he'd ever seen. The alien spacecraft descended through Earth's atmosphere like something out of a science fiction movie. Except this was real. After 72 hours of radio contact with beings from another world, humanity was about to have its first face-to-face meeting with extraterrestrial life. "Sir, their ship is touching down now," reported Colonel Janet Hayes from the communications station. She was one of the best physicists in the military, and even she looked stunned by what was happening. "The translator system they gave us is working perfectly. We should be able to talk to them normally." Tom nodded, trying to keep his expression calm. Inside, his mind was racing. 3 days ago, their deep space monitoring stations had detected something impossible, a massive tear in space-time, billions of miles away but growing larger every hour. Before they could even begin to understand what they were looking at, an alien voice had appeared on their radio frequencies. The conversation had been surreal. The alien ambassador, who called himself Kethvar, had explained that his people had records of Earth going back 2 centuries. They knew humans existed, but they'd always considered Earth too dangerous to visit. The planet's file was apparently filled with warnings about toxic atmosphere, crushing gravity, and violent weather patterns that made it unsurvivable for most galactic species. "They think our world is trying to kill us every day," Tom had told President Johnson during their emergency briefing. And they're not wrong. Now, watching through the reinforced windows of the command center, Tom saw the alien ambassador emerge from his ship. Kethvar was tall and graceful, with pale blue skin and for arms that moved with elegant precision. Behind him floated what looked like a sophisticated robot covered in sensors and scanning equipment. The meeting room had been prepared with chairs that could adjust to different body types, translation equipment, and enough recording devices to capture every word for history. When Kethvar entered, accompanied by 2 human guards and Dr. Rebecca Chin from the physics department, the first thing that struck Tom was how nervous the alien looked. "Ambassador Kethvar," Tom said, standing to greet their visitor, "welcome to Earth." The alien's translator rendered his response in clear English with only a slight mechanical tone. "General Bradley, I must admit, your species' reaction first contact is not what we expected." "What did you expect?" asked Dr. Chen, settling into her chair across from their guest. "Panic, religious upheaval, demands for advanced technology. Instead, your president simply asked what we needed." Kethvar paused, studying the humans with curious eyes. "In our experience, less advanced species usually react with fear or aggression when contacted by galactic civilization." Tom smiled grimly. "Ambassador, we've got bigger problems than wounded pride. Tell us about this dimensional rift your people are dealing with." Kethvar activated a small device, and holographic images filled the air above the table. The rift looked like a wound in space itself, pulsing with sickly light and growing larger with each pulse. It appeared 6 months ago in the Centaur system. Something from another dimension is trying to break through into our reality. Our sensors suggest the entities on the other side are hostile and extremely dangerous. What happens when they get through? Dr. Chen asked, leaning forward to study the images. Based on energy readings and the few probe signals we received before losing contact, we believe they feed on fear and panic. They're also massive, Some appear to be the size of small moons. Our weapons have no effect on the rift or anything that tries to emerge from it. The room fell silent as the humans processed this information. Finally, Tom spoke up. "And you came to us because you're from a death world," Kethvar replied. "The old record suggests your species has unusual psychological responses to extreme danger. Most civilized beings become paralyzed by fear when facing the unknown, but humans seem to function better under pressure." Dr. Chen looked at Tom, then back at the ambassador. "You're talking about fight or flight response, but in reverse. Most species choose flight when faced with overwhelming odds. You're hoping we choose fight. More than that," Kethvar said quietly, "we're hoping you can function when everyone else has broken down completely. The entities coming through that rift generate waves of terror that have left entire starship crews catatonic. We need people who can think clearly when everything seems hopeless." Tom stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Colorado mountains. Somewhere up there, beyond the atmosphere, alien civilizations were facing extinction from something they couldn't understand or fight. And they'd come to Earth, the backwater death world everyone avoided, looking for help. "Dr. Chen, what's your assessment of their dimensional rift?" he asked. "Based on what I've seen, it's definitely some kind of space-time anomaly. The physics are beyond our current understanding, but the basic concept makes sense. If something is trying to break through from another reality, the barrier between dimensions would thin gradually before finally rupturing completely." Tom turned back to Kethvar. "Ambassador, I'm going to be straight with you. We're a primitive species by your standards. Our weapons are crude, our ships are barely capable of interplanetary travel, and we know almost nothing about interdimensional physics." Kethvar nodded sadly. "I understand. Perhaps this was a mistake. But," Tom continued, "we spent our entire history dealing with problems that seemed impossible to solve. Humans have a saying, when you can't go around something, you go through it. If you need people who don't know when to quit, you came to the right place." The alien ambassador stared at him for a long moment. "You're volunteering for what amounts to a suicide mission against entities we don't understand, using weapons that may not work, to save civilizations you've never met." "That's about the size of it," Tom replied. "When do we leave?" Captain Mike Johnson stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance, staring out at the most terrifying sight he'd ever witnessed. The dimensional rift hung in space like a massive wound, pulsing with colors that made his eyes water. Around it, the combined human and alien fleet waited in tense formation. 50 hastily modified human ships surrounded by hundreds of sleek alien vessels that looked like works of art compared to Earth's boxy, utilitarian designs. "Sir, I'm getting readings from inside the rift," called out Lieutenant David Martinez from the sensor station. His voice was steady, but Mike could see the tension in his shoulders. "Something big is moving around in there." Mike nodded, keeping his expression calm. The past 2 weeks had been a blur of impossible activity. Human engineers working alongside alien technicians, trying to retrofit Earth's military vessels with technology they barely understood. The aliens have been amazed at how quickly humans adapted to their equipment, though they've been less impressed with human ship design. "Your vessels are built like weapons of war," Ambassador Kethvar had observed during one of the planning sessions. "Most civilized species design their ships for comfort and efficiency. We don't live in a civilized part of the galaxy," Mike had replied. "Our ships are built to take damage and keep fighting. Now, facing the unknown horrors beyond the rift, that philosophy was about to be tested. Captain," reported Chief Engineer Kate O'Brien from her station, "all systems are green. The reactor modifications are holding steady. If we need to overload, I can give you the explosion you want." Mike almost smiled at her casual tone. Kate had volunteered for this mission, knowing it was likely a one-way trip. And she'd spent the journey making jokes about turning their ship into the galaxy's most expensive firework. "Contact," David suddenly called out. "Something's coming through." The main screen flickered to life, showing the rift in high definition. The swirling energy began to bulge outward, and then something emerged that defied every law of physics Mike thought he knew. It was massive, easily the size of a city, and it seemed to be made of living darkness shot through veins of sickly light. Tentacles that looked miles long writhed around its core, and where they moved, space itself seemed to ripple and bend. The moment the creature fully materialized, every alarm on the bridge started screaming. But it wasn't the radiation detectors or energy sensors that were going off. It was the psychological monitoring systems the aliens had insisted on installing. "Sir, we're being hit with some kind of fear field," reported Lieutenant Susan Blake from the science station. "The aliens designed these monitors to detect terror-inducing effects. The readings are off the charts." Mike looked around his bridge. His crew looked tense and alert, but they were still functioning normally. Through the communication channels, however, he could hear the alien fleet falling apart. "This is Admiral Vex Theory to all ships," came a transmission, but the alien commander's voice was shaking with barely controlled panic. "All vessels maintain distance from the entity. Do not approach. Repeat, do not." The transmission cut off in a burst of static. On the tactical display, Mike watched as alien ships began drifting out of formation, their crews apparently paralyzed by terror. "Well, that's not good," observed Kate dryly. "Looks like it's just us humans now." "Sir," David called out, "I'm reading multiple contacts coming through the rift. 12, 15, 20 targets and counting. More than nightmarish entities emerge from the dimensional tear, each one radiating the same overwhelming aura of fear that had crippled the alien fleet. They moved with purpose, spreading out in a formation that suggested intelligence and tactical thinking. All human ships. This is Defiance," Mike announced over fleet communications. "Looks like our alien friends are having some technical difficulties. Anyone feeling scared?" "This is Captain James, right of the Yorktown," came the reply. "Sir, my crew is reporting that whatever these things are doing, it's not working on us. We're reading the fear effects on our sensors, but we're not feeling them." "Captain Lisa Parker here, Enterprise. Same situation. My people are ready to fight." One by one, every human captain reported in. The entity's psychological weapons, which had reduced advanced alien civilizations to gibbering terror, seemed to have no effect on the humans at all. "Kate," Mike called to his chief engineer, "how long do we need to set up the reactor overload?" 5 minutes once we're in position right next to the rift," she replied, checking her calculations. "But we'll need to get close enough to touch that thing, and I can't guarantee we'll be able to jump clear in time." Mike looked at the tactical display, where 23 massive entities now hung in space around a dimensional rift. Each one was easily powerful enough to destroy entire star systems, and more were still emerging. "All human ships," he announced. "This is what we came here to do. Any captain who wants to back out, now's the time." The communication channel was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "This is Captain Wright. We didn't come this far to quit now, Mike. Captain Parker here. My grandmother always said the only way out is through. Captain Rodriguez, Constitution. Let's show these things what humans do when someone threatens innocent people." Mike felt a surge of pride as every single human captain confirmed their commitment to the mission. "All right then, ladies and gentlemen, form up on my position. We're going straight at them." As the human fleet adjusted course toward the rift, Mike couldn't help but think about how strange this all was. Here they were, the primitive species from the dangerous backwater world, about to attempt something that the galaxy's greatest civilizations couldn't even contemplate. "Into the breach," he said quietly, and led humanity's first fleet into battle against the impossible. Admiral Vex Theory watched from her command ship as the impossible unfolded before her eyes. Her entire fleet, thousands of vessels representing the most advanced military technology in the galaxy, hung motionless in space, their crews paralyzed by waves of terror that poured from the dimensional entities. She could barely think straight herself, fighting against the overwhelming urge to curl up in a corner and wait for death. But the humans were different. Completely, impossibly different. "Asterisk Defiance asterisk to all human ships," came Captain Johnson's voice over the communication channel, as calm as if he were ordering coffee. "Form up an attack formation. We're going to thread the needle between these things and get to the rift." Vex Theory forced herself to focus on the tactical display. 50 human ships, tiny compared to the massive entities surrounding the dimensional tear, were moving in perfect coordination toward what should have been certain death. The creatures were so large that a single tentacle could crush an entire human vessel, and there were now 27 of them spreading out from the rift. "How are they even functioning?" whispered Science Director Mo-10 from the station. Like everyone else on the bridge, he was gripping his console with white knuckles, fighting the supernatural fear that made rational thought almost impossible. The answer came over the human communication channels, which the aliens were monitoring in stunned fascination. Asterisk Yorktown asterisk. To Enterprise, you seeing the size of that thing on the left? Copy that, James. Looks like something my kid would draw in his nightmare journal. Hey, Mike, remember that time we thought fighting the Koreans was scary? Yeah, David. Good times. At least they didn't have tentacles the size of skyscrapers. The humans were joking. In the face of cosmic horror that had reduced the galaxy's greatest civilizations to helpless terror, they were making jokes. Vexthery had seen humans fight before during their brief military exchanges, but this was something beyond her understanding. Asterisk Constitution, asterisk to Fleet Command, came another human voice. I'm reading weak spots in the dimensional barrier near the Rift Center. If we can get our reactors close enough and overload them simultaneously, we might be able to collapse the whole thing. Copy that, Rodriguez, Captain Johnson replied. All ships, prepare for reactor overload on my signal. Remember, we need to be practically touching that thing for this to work. The human fleet accelerated toward the rift, weaving between tentacles that could have destroyed them with a casual swipe. The entities seemed confused by these tiny creatures that refused to be afraid. Vexthery watched one of the nightmare beings actually pause, its massive form shifting, as if trying to understand why its psychological weapons weren't working. Admiral, called Commander Zixtal from the communication station. The humans are requesting that we pull our ships back to minimum safe distance. Why? Vexthery managed to ask. They say the explosion is going to be bigger than anything we've ever seen. On the screen, the human ships reached the dimensional rift. They formed a precise grid pattern around the tear in space-time, each vessel positioned exactly where it needed to be for maximum effect. The entities finally seemed to realize what was happening and began moving to attack, but it was too late. All ships, came Captain Johnson's voice. Reactor overload in 3, 2, 1, execute. What follows the most beautiful and terrible thing Vexthery had ever witnessed. 50 human ships simultaneously turned themselves into miniature stars, their reactors overloading in a carefully choreographed explosion that lit up half the galaxy. The dimensional rift, caught in the center of the blast, began to collapse in on itself. The entities, cut off in their source of power, dissolved into harmless energy patterns. The tear in space-time sealed itself with a sound that seemed to echo through dimensions. And then silence. Damage report. Vexthery called out, her voice shaking. Ma'am, 17 human ships managed to execute emergency jumps at the last second. The other 33. Mole-10 paused, checking his readings. They're gone, ma'am. They gave their lives to save us all. Vexthery stared at the space where the rift had been. In the distance, she could see the surviving human vessels, damaged but intact, their crews probably already making repairs and cracking jokes about their close call. Open a channel to Earth, she ordered. Priority 1, maximum signal strength. Ma'am, the galaxy needs to know what happened here today. We need to know what kind of species we've been ignoring in that backwater system. As her communications officer worked to establish the connection, Vexthery thought about everything she'd witnessed. For centuries, galactic civilization had looked down on primitive species, especially those from dangerous worlds. They'd assumed that advanced technology and comfortable living conditions made them superior to anyone who still struggled for survival. They'd been wrong. Channel open, Admiral. This is Admiral Vexthery of the Galactic Council Fleet. To Earth Command. Your people have just saved billions of lives across hundreds of star systems. Captain Johnson and his crews faced down an enemy that paralyzed our most advanced civilizations with fear, and they did it without hesitation. The reply came from General Bradley, the human military commander who had volunteered his entire fleet for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. Admiral, we're glad we could help. How are your people doing? The casual concern in his voice, asking about alien beings he'd never met after his own species had just suffered massive casualties, was perhaps the most alien thing Vex Theory had ever encountered. "General Bradley," she replied, "your species has earned a permanent place of honor in the Galactic Council. We will never forget this sacrifice." "We appreciate that, Admiral, but we didn't do this for recognition. We did it because it needed doing. That's what humans do when people need help." And in that moment, Vex Theory finally understood what the old reports had tried to explain. Earth hadn't just produced survivors from a hostile world. It had forged something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that ran toward danger when others needed protection, that found strength in impossible circumstances, and that treated the survival of strangers as their own responsibility. The galaxy had found its guardians, and they came from the one place no civilized being had ever wanted to visit.